Today on the podcast, I interviewed Diana May, a yoga teacher, trainer, and somatic experiencing practitioner specializing in applied neurology for pain and movement. She blends anatomy, nervous system science, yoga, and brain based tools to help people move with less fear and more confidence. With her background in ecology and community development, she brings a unique systems based understanding to the human healing experience. This podcast is essential for anyone who needs to cultivate safety in their body, and that might just be everybody. So, share this episode with a friend or family member. I cannot tell you how many people I've talked to who have done a laundry list of diets and supplements, and they are still so confused about their health, dealing with chronic fatigue, chronic pain, and chronic symptoms still. At Nutrition with Confidence, we do not believe in quick fixes. We help you bio-individualize your diet and lifestyle recommendations and walk you through a step-by-step process that helps you to rebuild your body and calm your nervous system through it. This helps you regain control of your health and build confidence in your ability to heal. If you're interested in finally getting to the roots of your chronic symptoms, schedule a free exploration call at Nutrition with Wonderful. Thanks so much, Diana May, for joining us today. I would love for you to get us started by just sharing a little bit of your story of how you became a neurosomatic yoga instructor.
Yeah. I think in general, I've always been this teacher. I just didn't always have the skills that I have now, but the intention was always there. So I came into yoga at my yoga practice when I was a young woman who was going through a mental health crisis. And I had no tools to manage my stress. I grew up with complex trauma. I didn't know that it was complex trauma. It was just my normal, fun childhood. Lots of great stuff that happened and some, complex trauma.
Mhm.
And I didn't have any way to manage my stress. So when I went off to college, I had I wouldn't say a full-on mental breakdown, but it was a rough transition, and my mental health really plummeted, and I got really sick and dropped out of school for a semester to focus on my mental health. And at that time, my sister had heard that yoga helps with stress and took me to my first yoga class. And I clearly remember having this realization of, wow, I have a body. And that sounds like a strange realization coming from a 19-year-old, but it had never occurred to me before then.
Yeah.
And I'm a highly intelligent person. I have a strong academic background. I love academia and learning and training, but I realized I know a lot about a lot of stuff and so little about myself and how my body works and how my spirit works. So that was my first entry point to yoga, and I just developed a very devoted practice and became a teacher and have just been doing it ever since. Yeah.
Yeah, I can relate to that with my own experience of trauma in childhood. Can you describe a little bit more about what complex trauma means, what that is?
Yeah, so there's a lot of understanding about PTSD, for example, where you have a specific event that happens, and once this one event happens, you're not the same afterwards. And so complex trauma is a little more complex because there's not one thing that you can point to that says, after this one thing, my life changed. So it's really just more about attachment systems and all the small things that created your environment growing up that shifted how you relate to this world and the mechanisms that your nervous system learned to help you survive this more interesting childhood. And those imprints live in your system and continue into your adulthood and shape a lot of your behaviors and thought processes. And there's even a lot of thought and understanding now that even diagnoses like autism or ADHD or chronic illness, like all these diagnoses are can be correlated with complex trauma
Yeah.
because our nervous system has such a big implication to our physical and mental and emotional health. So,
Hmm.
like sometimes I'll think, oh, I have some neurodivergency. I'm like, or I have complex trauma. And I don't need to know exactly which one I have. I'm just really like, this is how I am, and this is how I can work with myself and yeah,
Mm.
and kind of have
Yes.
some joy in my life.
Yes, exactly. Because it is such a complex system. All of the different body systems of our body, the nervous system, our, digestive system, our endocrine system, our hormones, things like that. They're all intricately connected, right? I do also remember a moment just so later in life than you would expect where I was doing a meditation, a guided meditation with a trauma informed therapist, and it was the first time I acknowledged that I my body actually existed as well, that I my body was actually taking up space and I was in my body, whereas so much of the coping, I think, mechanisms of our nervous system in those states of trauma, that we can end up out of our body, having this out of body experience, right? And can you go into that a little bit more about what trauma, what's the definition of trauma? Like what can we say is traumatic for somebody?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I love to say there's no universal definition of trauma. So every organization often has their own definition of it. So I'm a somatic experiencing practitioner. So I was trained under the umbrella of Dr. Peter Levine, who's like one of the grandfathers of modern trauma resolution. And in this modality, we're not as concerned with the what of the trauma. So the content doesn't matter as much. It does matter, but what I'm trained to understand more is the imprints in the nervous system. And so, how it's defined in this modality is anything that's too much, too fast, too soon for your system to handle. So it causes overwhelm, and then your experience is then fragmented so that it's more manageable for you to digest. So some fragments are in your conscious, and some fragments maybe are unconscious that you're unaware of. And I would say the opposite is true. So anything that's too little, too late, or too slow can also have the same imprints in your nervous system. So it's a type of overwhelm or underwhelm in your system. So
Hmm. That makes a lot of sense because there's little things throughout your life that you don't have control over. They're not capital T trauma experiences that most people would put, call traumatic. But it could be just subtle societal uh, influence of how people maybe as a woman are treating me or saying things to me as a woman, right? They can become little tiny little imprints of, oh, I'm not enough, or I'm not as important, or like my voice doesn't matter, or something like that, where that imprint can develop over time. But it's not just this one situation. It's not anybody's fault. It's just this way that our bodies are responding to our environment. And so it's not wrong. I think it's so important for us to understand like what's what's normal and I guess acceptable, or a way that we can accept the process, the kind of, yeah, the process of our body and the experiences that we have, the symptoms we might have. So why can you walk us through a little bit about how trauma can actually show up in, as a yoga teacher, like how does it show up in a yoga class or other healing modality spaces, and why it's so important to talk about this?
yeah, it's such a great question because I hear all the time in the yoga world that, oh, yoga is so good for your nervous system. And I obviously agree. I'm a yoga teacher. I think yoga can be incredibly nourishing for the nervous system, but there's so much nuance that happens. And so my combination of like the somatic work and the nervous system work with yoga, I realize it's not just about moving our bodies. It's really about building relationship with activation and building relationship with deactivation or downregulation. So for some people who have a trauma history where there was, I'm giving examples, but just know this is not a comprehensive example. So I hope the feeling or the concept is really what's going to stick. But if somebody has a trauma history where there was a lot of rage in their childhood, and their system learned that rage or sympathetic charge is dangerous or threatening to them, they might have a very low capacity to hold sympathetic charge in their system. Well, sympathetic charge is not inherently good or bad. It's also our ability to do sun salutations, to hold chair pose, to do planks, to like get that energy going in a yoga class that's heating. And so somebody who has a system that perceives activation as threatening isn't going to have a great experience doing activating work.
Yeah.
And the opposite is true. Some people, let's say this is an example, again, not comprehensive, but somebody with trauma in their system where they were neglected a lot in their childhood and or were left alone a lot in their childhood, maybe that translated to not a lot of capacity for down regulation. Like they're like, being left alone or being having nothing to do is now my system perceives that as threatening. And so relaxing is now overcoupled with threat in their system. So, in a yoga class, a typical physical yoga class, we're doing things that are upregulating, things that are downregulating, and so when I work with people who have trauma, I don't try to prescribe like, oh, lunges are healthy stress. I try to just create space where we can build a relationship with a little upregulation, a little downregulation, and see how do you respond? Do you like, are you comfortable? Are you familiar? Is it nice for you to do the upregulating stuff? And is the quiet, the restorative, the moments of pause, is that more uncomfortable for you, or is it the opposite? And how can we use this class to build relationship with both? Because both have value.
Mm.
So I think that's a long answer and not comprehensive answer to your question.
No, it's good. Yeah, and I've heard you say too before that, well, and I my own experience with yoga, there were times when some instructors, there's kind of this pressure in the class to just keep moving through all the poses and you just kind of power through. And uh and I've been in classes where the instructor will say, this is your practice, so make it your own. And it gives you this, it gave me this amazing freedom to be able to actually start to tweak certain poses on my own if I felt like that day I just needed more of a downregulated class. Even though I was there, I didn't have to pressure myself to work really hard and hold the pose as long as everybody else, right? And it's like stepping away from some of that conditioning that I've had is in our society that we have to like overperform oftentimes and just be doing like everybody else, comparing ourselves to other people and things like that. So I've heard you talk about that. And is there anything else you want to say about that piece and kind of I see it actually in my nutrition sessions too with people where I sometimes have to explicitly tell people this is just a recommendation and I want you to experiment with it, but it you have to, I want you to learn about what parts of it are your own and make it your own because it's not prescriptive. But some people say take what I am recommending as a very prescriptive thing and that feels stressful to them and they're not responding well to it. And I think it's a piece of that. What do you think?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think this is the art of teaching and the art of facilitating is we want to give a structure without making it feel rigid. And I always try to instill like more choice, right? And of course, to some people, having too many choices is incredibly stressful. Like if you talk to a 2-year-old and you're like, give them 10 different things, it's going to feel too many choices. Sometimes we need to narrow it down. Like you can do this or this. Which one do you want?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So there is an art, but I think as much as we can facilitate choice, which requires practice in listening to your physiology. Like, what does a yes feel like? What does a no feel like?
Mm.
And I think we're familiar with our head and our story around, work is good, rest is bad. And so we can defer to this story in our brains, but our physiology often speaks with more nuance and doesn't always line up with our expectations in our head.
Mm-hmm.
So I always try in a yoga class or when I'm working one-on-one with people to restore choice and to build this relationship with like, what is your body saying? Because it can get confusing because there's lots of messages coming from all over the place. What's mine? What's theirs? It's always
Yeah.
changing. It's a lifelong practice.
Yeah. Of listening to your body and trying to understand it and make sense of what it's trying to tell you, right? I have more questions about that a little later, but let's focus a little bit still on that the nervous system. I think there's so much talk right now, like dysregulation is such a buzzword. Um, and I think people can over identify with this, like, oh, I'm dysregulated. I'm just, you know, and um, can you go into what maybe a healthy understanding of our nervous system might look like if we're thinking about like, uh, activation and dips, things like that?
Yeah. Yeah, I have so much to say about this. So often, what I see and what I think you probably can attest to is that, like, oh, a regulated nervous system means somehow it's been twisted to mean that we're going to be calm all the time, or we're going to feel good all the time, or we'll know exactly what to do all the time. Like that somehow it's a regulated nervous system is this ideal state where everything falls into place.
Yeah.
We handle everything perfectly. And I get why people want it to be that way. But really, a regulated nervous system is responsive to life. We want a nervous system that can respond appropriately to life. And life has a natural rhythm. So everybody cycles, regardless of what gender you are, regardless if you have a menstruation cycle or you're postmenopause, like we all have cycles. Life has cycles. We're very cyclical in this universe. Very few things are linear. And one cycle could be it's daytime and then it's nighttime. We inhale and we exhale. Class starts and then it ends, right? So there's even just with those three examples, it's nothing is static in this world. So we shouldn't be either. Um, and there is a term that's coined by Dr. Dan Siegel, which is the window of capacity, which is a window of tolerance that you can be with activation, this upregulating, activating energy, and you can be with this downregulating energy. And so within this window of capacity, you often have more choice. When you get bumped out of your window of capacity is when what's called like the survival strategies kick online. It's often unconscious. You don't choose it. So therefore you have less choice of how you're responding. So when we get really angry and snap at people, usually that's not like our, we're not like consciously choosing. It's like a reaction. Or when we shut down and we're like, I can't talk about this, and we give the silent treatment or have to leave the room. It's not happening by choice. Your physiology is responding appropriately to the perceived threat that's happening. Um, And so, what I like to add to this, because in this window of capacity language, it can make it seem like, we just have to stay in our window of capacity, and we should never get bumped out of our window of capacity. And that's also not true. So, we
Oh,
need to be able to get bumped out. Like, life will happen to us. And so, I always sort of bring the analogy in of river systems and river ecology because a river, it floods. Like that's the natural life cycle of a river. And we think of a river as this one body of water, but actually a river system expands way beyond the visual river itself. It includes the land, the water table, the forest around it. Um, and so this river has evolved with the ecosystem around it, and it can hold a certain amount of rain without overflowing. But there's always 100-year floods, 500-year floods, 1,000-year floods. There's always times that the river is going to flood, and therefore the ecosystem around it has evolved with these floods as well. And
mhm.
if the river never flooded ever in its entire lifespan, the ecosystem would not be as resilient as it is. These plants need occasional floods, and it can look very devastating when a flood happens, but it's actually required for the resilience of the whole ecosystem.
Yeah.
Um, so I always like to say a regulated nervous system is sort of a myth, and that we do want to expand our capacity to hold as much water as possible, but that's never the goal. And we actually need our survival systems to be intact because sometimes we need them. So
Yeah. It makes me think of the permaculture principle that I think is a really cool framework to apply to so many other systems. So, you have that background with ecology, and I love this analogy of the river uh, because with permaculture principles, one of them is like slowing the water down. You always are trying to find, well, that's what happens in nature. Like nature naturally does that. And an example of that are beaver dams. They really help with the water table, and they help slowing the water down. Um, and it can, yeah, it's just that picture of stretching the capacity for our nervous system is like small little beaver dams, even or floods, big floods. Sometimes that it's not about controlling whether or not that happens. It's our intention to when that happens of how we respond to it, and what intention do we have towards it? Is it to control it, or is it to just respond to it? So I love that. Thank you for sharing that. It's a really great picture for me. And I love the overlaps with ecology and natural systems. I think it's such a good way for us to understand ourselves. And you've said that before too, I'm sure. Yeah. Um, what is applied neurology, and how did you get into that? And what is it? What do you use it for?
yeah, so as I became a yogi and a yoga teacher, I fell in love with anatomy. I think I mentioned earlier in this conversation how I was like, I have a body. And I'm also an academic, so I loved learning all about human anatomy with a yoga lens and biomechanics. And it was so fascinating to me. And so I'm a huge anatomy nerd.
Mm.
You can see my magical skeleton behind me there.
Yeah, with wings. I love it.
Um, and then I became a somatic experiencing practitioner and really understood and dove in deeply with how the nervous system functions as the body's communication system. But as the academic um, anatomy nerd that I am, I wanted more understanding of the physical nerves. So somatic experiencing does have a little bit of that training in it, but as far as like what are the actual nerves, but I'm such a I love tangible physical movement, and I was like, the nervous system is also physical. Like there's a physical component to this communication system. So
Hmm.
I really just sought out trainings that helped me understand it more, and that led me down this applied neurology path, which I trained with a woman. Well, first I did a lot of self-study, and then I trained with a woman named Missy Bunch online, who's a phenomenal teacher, and she makes neurology so user-friendly. And then her teacher was Dr. Cobb of Z Health. So then I did, and I'm still doing the Z Health training, but it's this whole modality that applies brain-based understanding and the physical nervous system to movement. And I just fell in love with it. And it really connected a lot of the dots that were missing for me as far as people's movement patterns that are influenced by their brain and their nervous system. And the brain is the nervous system, and our movements are actually this incredible real-time emergence of our brain and nervous system communicating with each other.
Hmm.
So, yeah, the applied neurology is really the study of how movement influences the brain and how the brain influences our movement via very specific pathways through our physical nerves that land in specific places in our brain and in our body and all that.
Yeah. Yeah. I used to work at a functional medicine clinic and they did functional neurology. And I feel like it's the same thing. Um, and so, our bodies are constantly getting information all the time, and so, like you're saying, like the actual physical nerves connecting to the neurons and that information influences us and we can use that to our advantage. I think with situations with chronic pain, uh, that's kind of your main focus, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yes, I work with a lot of people. Just over the years, the students who evolved with me, like my yoga teaching has changed over, so, I started teaching in my 20s and now I'm 40. Hopefully my teachings have evolved.
Good. That's a good
A
sign.
lot of students have evolved with me. And a lot of students that continue to practice with me have a lot of injury, a lot of pain, chronic pain, and chronic injuries. And so they found that the style of yoga, because I'm very anatomy and let's take our time and let's really work, like figure out what muscle we're working, like that just like they felt safer with me to progress in their practice in a way that was really helpful for them. And so I have a lot of experience working with people with a wide array of injuries. And so the neurology piece just fit in so well because I'm like, oh, if your glute's not firing, let's try this neuro tool. Or like, oh, your neck still isn't freed up. Let's try this. Like, let's try opening up this neuro pathway and see if we can help. So,
I think it's so fascinating because when I've had injuries in the past and when I'm going in the past I've had gone through some detoxes or um inflammation would kick up in my body because of whatever reason. I that injury would flare. It's like whiplash in my neck. And I just think it's so fascinating when that happens because it's not, you wouldn't think that would happen. Like there is such an overlap with the nervous system with so many other parts of our body. So even though this is such an important tool for chronic pain, I think that it is probably you're working with compensations in the brain and the nervous system and balancing that more so that can create more homeostasis and less inflammation elsewhere in your body with like hormones. So um, yeah, my clients really like to understand exactly why things might be stalling in their progress, and how the brain drives physical symptoms. Like, for example, like the chronic tension, fatigue, migraines, post exertion malaise, uh, this kind of pattern of feeling stuck. Um, so I'm curious how you would work with that and what if applied neurology or the the somatic work and trauma, how that interplays in those cases.
Yeah, when people have chronic pain or chronic symptoms, I always just sort of zoom out and think just around basic pain science, and how pain is described as an output of the brain. Well, one, pain is very, very real. Like if you have pain, it's what I'm not saying is pain is all in your head. That's not true. It's felt in the body, it's real. And it's also pain is a behavior modification tool. So when your nervous system is perceiving threat, whether it's real or perceived, pain is a really great way that the brain influences what you're doing immediately to keep you more safe. And so, for example, if your brain is detecting threat, and it's like, you need to stop doing whatever it is you're doing. I'm going to make your back hurt because you can't do much when your back is hurting. So
Mm.
it really gets you to stop doing whatever it is you're doing. And also, if you had an old injury like whiplash, where it's like, there's maybe a neuro tag of like, this is like a pain pathway, and now I'm perceiving threat. Rather than creating new pain, I'm just gonna like go to this old pain, fire it back up so that you can just stop doing what you're doing. So sometimes it's like pain is so complex, but at the heart of it, it's trying to protect you.
Mm.
And so how the nervous system works in a very simple level. You mentioned the first bit is we're receiving all this information. Our bodies are receiving 11 million bits of information every second. And the brain is processing that, asking, am I safe or not? It has to filter through that question first because its main job is to keep you alive for the next few moments. So if your brain is perceiving threat, it's going to produce some kind of output to keep you safer. For a lot of us, it's pain. It could also be immune function, endocrine dysfunction, all sorts of stuff, physical tension in your body. So, just working with the neurology piece or the somatic piece, we can begin to lower your overall level of threat in your system. I don't need to know everything about your history to do that. I don't need to know exactly what happened to your knee 18 years ago, or exactly what's going on in your personal relationships that's stressful, or exactly what's happening in your job or living situation that's stressful to you. I don't need to know that. All I need to work with you on is figuring out how can we lower your system's overall level of threat so it feels a little safer, and we can tell if it's feeling safer, if your pain levels decrease, if your movement improves, and all these things.
Mm.
So sometimes, like, I don't like to get lost in the details, even though I'm very detail oriented.
Yeah, that's so important because even just the neural pathways, if we keep talking about the injury, it's like lighting up this almost like miniature trauma to the body. And sometimes that can be more activating in the moment. So sometimes I love practices like the trauma release exercises, things like that, which or somatic, experiencing. Can you tell us a little bit more about the somatic experiencing tools and, or more so the framework? I've heard you talk about like the wide range of experience that humans have. Can you go into that?
Yeah. So it's hard to describe somatic experiencing. It's really something that needs to be felt and experienced. But if I were to say any of the tools around it, in my opinion, the number one tool is creating resource in the body. And so really that is like, I call it a pleasure practice or resourcing practice. So it could be something as simple as look around your room and what catches your eye. Because if, like, right now I'm looking out my window and there's this red, like it's the end of fall and there's these bright red leaves, and I really think they're beautiful. And it's something that could be overlooked, but when I see something that I'm like, oh, that's pretty, there's actually something in my body that's letting me know I like that. My system is literally perceiving more safety when I see something pleasant and I register that pleasantness. And
Mm.
so if I can connect the image of seeing this red leaf to a felt experience in my body of like, oh, I spontaneously take a deeper breath when I look at that leaf. I'm like, oh, there's a connection, right? So I'm rather than the fragmentation of too much need to separate things so it's more manageable, I'm like, I'm reconnecting pleasant
Mm-hmm.
with a
Mm-hmm.
felt sense.
Mm.
So somatic experiencing, there's more to it than that, but the like a great tool is I call it pleasure practice. What brings you pleasure? And then connect that to how it feels when you let yourself consciously register that pleasurable thing, whether it's coffee in the morning, looking at a red leaf. I love taking time every day to see the light change on my walls. Like
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
right. I'm like, oh, it's magic. And I'm like, oh, like there's this softening that immediately happens. That's
Mm.
my system registering safety.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. No, light is magical and so transformative to us. But you've shared in the past too about the difference between the the brain separation of I see beautiful, fog out my window right now and like the mist. And I am thinking that's really beautiful. But then you're saying there's a tuning into the felt sense as well. So it's not just it's really slowing down, which is I have a question. Let me just ask this. For people who have had complex trauma or have spent years feeling unsafe in their body, how do they begin to slow down and rebuild trust with that experience?
Hairline by hairline. So I think there's this tendency, it's definitely in the yoga world. I do see it in the somatic world as well, but it's um of catharsis, this idea of like having these big releases and like, oh, safety, like I want to feel safe and I want to feel ecstatic and I want to feel like
Hmm.
100% amazing, like I just got out of the spa for all day. Which don't get me wrong, that can be great as well, but often the longer lasting shifts that we need, and especially if you are someone who has trauma, um, reconnecting to the subtlety, which can, your brain might perceive it as boring or it's too small, it's not worth my attention, but I am here to tell you it's not too small and it's so worth your attention.
Mm.
Um, And a big practice I have a lot of my clients do, and this sounds so small, but we're taught from childhood to override our body's needs on the regular. When you go to school, you have to hold your pee, you have to raise your hand to go to the bathroom,
Yeah.
like small things. If you're thirsty, you can't drink because you're in class. So these are ways we're taught to override our body and so a huge practice in addition to like pleasure practice is if you feel like you have to go to the bathroom, get up and go to the bathroom. Do not wait.
It sounds so simple, but it's like yeah, how many times have we just said, no, I'm going to wait a little longer or something? I'm in the middle of something.
Certainly, sometimes we can't, right? Like I get that, but if you're in a position where you can listen to these cues and it helps to build trust back with your body, where it's like, I'm giving you a little whisper of a need, and I notice that and I'm going to follow through and take care of that need. It's such a trust building exercise with our physiology that is required. Because if we're constantly overriding these small signals, a lot of times your body then starts to get louder to get your attention.
Yeah. Yeah. So along that line, then with the loudness that sometimes those communications from your body can get, Some of my clients really have a hard time with distinguishing between when they're doing too much and when they're not doing enough, I guess. I don't think people are ever not doing enough, but most of the time. Um, but yeah, that just this feedback loop that the body gives you. And their symptoms specifically like with dysautonomia clients, like dizziness, fatigue, sometimes pain, like neuropathy. So what is the safety cue? When is it more of like your body needs safety, and when is it that you might need to just push through? Do you think that's ever needed?
I mean, I think there's going to be situations where it all is needed, but something I'll share with clients too, or that if like they're having trouble distinguishing like how much is too much, like I like to do physical practices with them and it's all subjective, right? But I'm like, push into this wall until you feel like you're at like as hard as you want to, and like that's your level 10. And then like, okay, like let's go to five. Like, what does a five, if that's a 10, what does a five feel like? And so just like I try to make it tangible and subjective to them because it's everyone's going to be different. So I think there are creative ways we can help people build relationship to figuring out their thresholds. And it's just like any practice. Like you might not get it 100% right all the time, but if you practice the skill, you're going to get more clarity on what that feels like. So, um,
Yeah. And if they go outside of it, it's like going back to that analogy of the flood. It's okay. It's not the end of the world. You didn't harm yourself. You're not, even though your body might have a response and in your brain saying this is a negative response, we don't want the preferred symptoms, or like we don't prefer to have those symptoms when that are just signals though that your body's saying like this is overstretching potentially. But I think people get caught up in like, oh, I cannot, it's like that uh, tolerance box that they're like, oh, now I have to stay in this tolerance box. But it's okay to keep pushing the limits and keep trying. And you will never really know exactly like why one day all of a sudden you did the same thing that you normally do and you have a headache now, or something like that. Like we can't always figure that out. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. And one thing I always am amazed by is, especially people who have chronic pain, chronic illness. I This might sound dramatic, but I feel like they are medicine for this world because our whole society is designed with messages of like push through, go, 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 do as much as you can. Your value in this world is tied to your productivity. And a lot of people who have chronic illness can't produce that much. They are physiologically prevented from going to work 9 to 5 every day. Um, and so they've literally had to create a different way to be in this world. And a lot of people, and there is a struggle and there is grief. I'm not saying it's an easy process, but a lot of people I've met with chronic illness, it's like you have to figure out a different way to find self-worth that's not tied to your productivity because otherwise you're going to be up shit's creek and it's going to suck. So it's like you have to figure out a different way to value yourself that's not based on your productivity. So a lot of times they are literal living examples of other ways of being in this world that I think everybody could benefit from.
A hundred
So I'm
percent.
like, if you don't know how to slow down, go hang out with people who have chronic illness. They will show you. And it's like, it's not easy. I'm not trying to sugarcoat it or make it seem magical. Like, it's hard and it's can be extremely challenging at times. But I'm like, in some ways, it's medicine that we all need.
Yeah. The silver lining of symptoms are really a gift to us and the whole world. And I would argue, I think, you would agree, looking at nature, nature doesn't doesn't seek value in its production. It just does it just is, and is in its beingness has value, and we are part of nature. And so it's returning to that, and kind of breaking down those societal constructions that we might have held on to, for value in worth. I agree. So, and actually, a lot of the clients that I see have, are, transitioning women from, cycling, going through perimenopause and into postmenopausal, and there's a huge shift of their identity there too. And the way it's very unfortunate, um, the way we view women in our society, and especially as we age, the value of their worth. But I think of that time as a beautiful, transition to like wisdom and, a role of teaching in our society that we should really look up to. But they're going through a lot of symptoms of anxiety and pain, and maybe that's what's normal for our society, but I don't think it's what's actually intended for our nature. Indigenous tribal women don't technically go through these kinds of symptoms as much, but it doesn't mean that it's we can actually, in our society, we have to work with what we can. And I think it's a little bit, at this point, we've come down this, there's so much toxic soup in our society that it's really impacting our hormones so negatively, that women are really facing the brunt of that. And we can't really, idealistically try to get to this place of where those indigenous tribal women are, like that would be great, but I don't know if we can. So how do you help people specifically with, especially what, postmenopausal symptoms, the nervous system disruption, what's happening in the brain during that time, and how can we support him?
Yeah, I mean, this could be a whole nother podcast, a whole nother several podcasts. So I don't know if you know, but I am postmenopausal. So I went through early menopause,
Okay.
which when I went through it at 35, I didn't know I was going through menopause, although I suspected, and all my doctors told me, you're too young to go like this. We don't know what it is, but it's not menopause. And lo and behold, it was.
Wow.
And then I got certified in a yoga for menopause teacher through my friend and teacher, Neve Daly. But I learned that menopause, 1% of the population will go through it early. So while I'm in the rare, like I'm more rare, um, you can absolutely go through it early. We don't really know why. Of course, there's surgery, like, if you have a hysterectomy, sometimes it's like surgically induced
Yeah.
menopause. You're on certain medications. But there are about 1% of the population who will go through it early. So this is a topic near and dear to my heart because when I went through menopause and learned that it was menopause, I had to face my own internal ageism because I was like, oh, that's like for old people. I'm not old. And I'm like, oh, and I like there was something uncomfortable for there for me. And I always thought I was like pro-aging. And I was like, oh, I've like internalized some of these messages that have been given to me from this society who values youthfulness and like all this stuff. And we're taught to like cling to our youthfulness and, have surgeries and like all these things. I'm like, what? Um, Anyway, so I digress. That was a little rant, but I believe that menopause is a rite of passage, that if you are born with a womb and with ovaries, you live to a certain age, you will go through this. Like 100% of women, if you live long enough, go through this rite of passage. And our society is just modernly historically, just harms women. We're not included in research. Our world is designed with very masculine type energy, and because of that, we're harmed, physiologically harmed.
Hmm.
And so I do believe a lot of the symptoms that most women experience during this transition are due to this mismatch of how society is designed. and this like natural rite of passage that we get to walk through.
Yeah.
So our experience might not be as wonderful as it could be due to the society we live in, and that just freaking sucks. Because
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
like like we're walking through this portal, and there's only a handful of living creatures who have women who go through menopause. And like I believe that, yeah, I think they like certain whales go through menopause as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like this grandmother hypothesis that, the women who age and can no longer have children, whether you wanted to or not, um, it's like we have inherited this wisdom of how to survive, and then all of our energy can go into like this other creative process of supporting society as a whole. And I think more women need to hear stories of other women. I think women should be celebrated. I think I think we should just be treated better during
Yeah.
this time and not be sold like, you know, if you have symptoms, then you should fix it with this or that. And it's like now we have this pressure to go through menopause perfectly, and we have to eat like, even if some science holds true, I don't like the pressure that's put onto us to like, now if we have symptoms in menopause, somehow it's our fault because we're not exercising the right way, or we're not on HRT or the right HRT, or we're not eating the right things. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's just like, we're in a really interesting time with menopause where we're getting more research, which is amazing. But with this social media frenzy and like profiting off of women's insecurities, it's like this booming business
Yeah.
where it's like, I can sell you this thing that will make this transition better so you can stay youthful.
That's the focus. Yes, it's about anti-aging rather than for men's health, it's like longevity, aging wisely. There's still acknowledgement in men's health that they are aging and that's accepted. In women, for women, it's marketed as anti-aging. Why why can't we age? You know, we should be able to age. I mean, we are aging. It's happening.
I want that to be celebrated. Like, I love showing my wrinkles and my fine lines. I'm like, I earned these. And there
Yes.
is part of me that's like, oh, make sure the lighting's right. And so that no, I'm like, no,
Yeah.
I want you to see my wrinkles. Like, these are literally my map that I wear on my face. And if it makes you uncomfortable, how I hope to present myself is like, I just want to be a drop in the bucket that says aging is beautiful. Your fine lines are beautiful. We have more to offer as we age. Like, I know that to be true in myself. So
Yeah. Yeah. So the anxiety and some of those symptoms you think are really just the nervous system's response to all this pressure that we have to just not, we're not accepting the fact that we are in this new transformed state as a woman. Um, yeah. And so the, we never really actually talked about yet the neurosomatic yoga that you do. Is that kind of just the combination of the applied neurology and the somatic experiencing in your practice? Or is it a coined thing itself? Or did you create it?
So me and my colleague Neve Daly, who I became certified a yoga for menopause teacher through her. She approached me a couple years ago and was like, I want to create a brain health training. And so we created neurosoma training together. So it's really looking at the nervous system and brain health through a yogic lens. Like, how can we as yoga teachers support our clients and students who are aging and prioritize brain health and nervous system health? And also, like, I bring in the chronic pain piece because that's what I look at. So, yeah, because our one of the most feared diseases of aging is Alzheimer's dementia. And it also happens to be um, one of the conditions that we can improve the most with lifestyle changes. So we can reduce our risk of developing Alzheimer's through brain health practices and movement practices. So
Yeah.
like that's kind of the intention of our training is like, how can we make our yoga practice nourishing for the brain?
Hmm. Yeah, that's so important. And it speaks to me specifically. Alzheimer's runs in my family. My mom has early onset, and it's so exercise and movement is so good for the brain. And so, what are the simplest daily practice or somatic practices, specifically, I guess, that people can do to calm a specifically that overactive sympathetic system for people? Because that's so common in our society.
Yeah, it's hard to give one thing because, like I said, it's really about our relationships with things. But a couple go-to places, I'm a huge eye movement person. I feel like our visual system is so tied to our brain's perception of safety. So I'm really big on doing visual work, eye exercises, which are not really about exercising the muscles of the eye, but working with the nerves that move the extraocular eye muscles that connect to the brain stem, which is like our autonomic, like one of the pillars of our autonomic system is our brain stem.
Mm.
So I love introducing visual work, eye work. If somebody's not responding well to that, which does happen sometimes, even though all the theories like this should work, but sometimes, as we know, things don't work for everybody. I'll just try to focus on other cranial nerves. So, other nerves that go to the brainstem, like skin stimulation of the face, or humming, or gargling, or vestibular work. There's lots of ways we can support our brainstem to feel safer. Uh,
Mm. That's
so
huge. Yeah.
that's
Why?
what my workbook is all about. So,
Oh, perfect. Yeah. So people can go if they want to learn about the eye exercises and these different ways to basically create and cultivate safety in their body when they're in that, and they can practice interacting with their own system in this when they're in that overactive sympathetic state. Um, they could go to your website and get that workbook, right? And they could also work with you one on one. What you had mentioned that some people, the eye movement specifically doesn't work as well. You said it's the number one. Why do you think, do you have any theories of why that might not be working for some people?
I have theories. This is not factual. So, this is just like my own theory.
Yeah, like based on your clinical experience with clients.
Yeah, I think for some people, the eyes might be too activating, and I
Mm-hmm.
think some people with specific kinds of trauma, I think it's really helpful for a lot of people, and a lot of people with trauma can benefit greatly from this eye work. But some people, you know, looking around at certain things or like moving the eyes around just might be too much for their nervous system. And so it's
Yeah.
too stimulating. And so
Mm-hmm.
again, it's that relationship. So like, that I think could be a thing. And some people are just more like if they have more trouble with the exteroceptive stuff for whatever reason, whether it's neurodivergence or some kind of trauma or just even like a learned preference, exteroceptive stuff isn't as good. So sometimes then working with the proprioceptive system is going to be a lot more helpful for those people. So
Mm-hmm.
I
What?
usually find on average, like if I do a workshop where we do an eye exercise, on average, like 70% of people, 70 to 80% of people are like, wow, that was amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And like 15% of people are like, that didn't really do much. And like 5% of people are like, oh, that tightened me up, or they had a negative response. So it does happen. And so I always say it's good information to know. Like for whatever reason, like looking in a certain direction your system doesn't like, and you just learned one important thing about yourself. So
Yeah. Yeah. And for that period, if they respond that way, do you probably want to focus on the other areas first and then maybe come back and revisit it in the future? Yeah.
yeah, so if I'm working one-on-one with them, there's lots of ways. So essentially, I want to get my client to that if they look off in a direction, it's not a threat to their system, right? Like I want you to be able to look in whatever direction you need to and have that be not threatening to your system. So sometimes we'll do some rehab work or looking at a certain direction can be an assessment where it's like, okay, we're going to look in this way and then we'll do something else and see if we can improve the experience. So like coupling something that's safer with looking in that direction. So there's some rehab stuff that we can do.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Awesome. And what about the with somatic experiencing, there's a lot of emotions, that come up in our body. And like, how do emotions play into this work? And what do we do with our emotions?
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna say something so basic, but we have to feel them.
Hmm.
So much, so many of us. One, either we don't know we have them. I don't have feelings. Okay. Interesting. Fragmentation. Um,
Yes.
or we think about our feelings a lot and we talk about our feelings a lot. But very similar to what I was saying about the pleasure practice, like looking at the red leaf, I know I like it and I have this felt sense. When we feel anger or we feel sadness, there's a felt sense in our body that lets us know we're feeling these things. So I really try to support people in feeling their feelings in a way that's titrated and slow enough to not be overwhelming. Because sometimes what people do is they either dive right in and they're like, I'm going to feel it 100%, and that can be too much, too fast, too soon for the system.
Yeah.
So it's really about like, I'm going to resource and then feel a little bit of the emotion in my body and then come back to the resource. So just
Yeah.
that they're like oh they don't have to dive in. They can feel a little bit of it and build that capacity to be like, oh, feeling a little bit of the anger did not kill me.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it seems we've interviewed a lot of IFS practitioners on the podcast, and there seems to be some meaning, with these parts of us that they create about the feeling of they're going to die. It's like life or death situations. And maybe that's because of where that part might have arisen in their history. But I have a good experience of this, because of grief that I've been experiencing with my mom, um, progressing with Alzheimer's. It has felt a lot like life or death. And this is actually kind of recent, just even a couple of weeks ago, went to the coast and it was like a beautiful day. The sun is shining. I snuggled up on this huge redwood log that had just, it's like driftwood. And it had this little cove in it that I could just cuddle up in, and it just held me. And I just felt my grief. And then I tuned out to look at this, the sky and the wind and the ocean. It's just like, okay, I'm okay. I'm okay. And yeah, my heart's beating already right now, fast, just feeling that. But it was so healing, and hopefully that helps anybody who's going through grief, or any other hard emotions. But there's a lot of resistance, to feel that, especially with these complex traumatic experiences we've had. And but we are safe. We can do it safely. And sometimes it, like, I needed to do that a lot with like my partner. That was kind of the first experience that I was able to do on my own and feel really good about that, kind of processing and feeling it, and just did it for a short time in and out. And then it's like, you look at kids and they just go from one emotion to the next so quickly. They like process that sadness, and they feel it all, and then they're like out and playing and laughing the next moment. And we can do that too. We can get back into that freeness, that sense of freedom and connection with our bodies. And I want that for everybody. So, yeah. Anyways, I'm glad you mentioned that, because, and that's definitely something I wanted to ask about, like that resistance piece. And like it just takes time and small incremental moments of acknowledging it.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that story. It's so potent.
Yeah. So I guess one of the last questions that we love, well, actually, before I ask this question, is there anything else you want to, that I've missed asking and that's top of mind that you feel like people need to know about supporting their nervous system with movement?
I think just reiterating that it's practice, we only practice it. There's no end to it, there's no perfection of it. It's all practice. So,
There's no end moment in time that you've made it. It's all a process.
and hopefully that's encouraging and not like, oh, there's no end. Then, hopefully I want that to feel encouraging. It's a
Mhm.
lens in which we walk through the world.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I think all of us have a part that, oh, well, maybe not all of us, but I definitely have a part of me that wants things to just be done and over, like just check that off, not have to deal with that anymore. And I think having ourselves kind of have conversation with that part, maybe like what it's really afraid of if we did have to go through this the rest of our lives, like what is it really afraid of? Might be helpful to be able to work with that part because it just probably wants to protect us from something.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So one question we like to ask everyone who's on the podcast is what is a um, question that you'd like to leave with our listeners to ponder this week?
Hmm. Well, I'll ask, when in the last few days have you felt most like how you wanted to feel?
Mm, thank you. Thank you. That's a great question. And how can people get started on supporting themselves and their nervous system? What's the best way for them to get started and get help from you? Where can they find you?
Yeah, well, I share a lot of stuff on my Instagram for free, but one of the things I'm most proud of is I created this 12-day workbook that takes people through all 12 of the cranial nerves, which again go to your brainstem, which is a pillar of your autonomic system. And each each day of the workbook, I have one gentle, accessible practice that will help support your nervous system. And I teach you how to assess each nerve. And so you'll get this real-time information of, does this practice work for my nervous system or not? And it's gorgeously designed. I had my friend Corinne Marie custom make some art. I have some hanging on my back wall. So it's like very beautifully designed and easy and accessible to read. And I have video tutorials, and it's like an incredible resource. One, if you're a neuro nerd, you're going to want it just to learn about the cranial nerves. There's not a resource out there like it, which is why I created it. But it's also very accessible and gentle practices. So it's going to give you a lot of structure to figure out to kind of create your own neurosomatic protocol. Like what are the things your system can do on the regular to keep integrating more and more safety into your days. So it's an amazing resource, and I honestly think every single person would benefit from it.
Yeah, I agree. We we don't we don't talk about what it feels like to feel safe. And I think our whole lives can feel, it could be hard for some people to think of a time where they felt that. I think nature draws a lot of people, but it's really cool to for people to just get if you don't know what it feels like to feel safe, get this workbook and try these different modalities so you can get some real time information and feedback. And you don't have to go anywhere. You can do it from your home. So that's really powerful. Yeah. Awesome. Great. Yeah. Well, thank you. And everyone, go and check that out and have a wonderful week.